Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy. Thank you for joining me today on July 30th, 2024. It's a beautiful day, and today we're going to talk about a really incredible book called The Golden Ass, or the Metamorphoses. We're going to be diving deep into Apuleius's version. This was spurred on because Emin, a good friend of mine, on his channel is having a bunch of his students dig into this text, and it's such an interesting text. Not specifically the Apuleius version, though. This story has such a really complicated and interesting history. So the earliest reference that I could find to the golden ass comes in 129 in a book by a man named Photius, and he's talking about the ass by a character named Lucius of Petra, I believe. Let me just double check how I look at this name here. It is, of Patre. Lucius of Patre seems to be the original writer of this Greek epic called the Metamorphoses, or the Ass. Lucius's ass, right? And Photius references that this particular book is then lost, but it is commentated upon, and an abridgment is written of by the Greek writer Lucian that's called Lucius's Ass. And that's the one that Ammon is going to have his students read, is Lucius's abridged version of Lucius's original, Lucius of Petra. See, it gets so complicated with all these weird names because Apuleius's first name is Lucius, and the main character of the Ass is Lucius, and the writer of the original Ass is Lucius of Patre, and the writer of the abridged version is Lucian. Anyway, it's fun. It's an interesting tale, but we're going to go to Apuleius's version because this is the longest, most complete Latin text, and it kind of tells a slightly different version than the one that we find in Lucian's abridgment. And I wanted to kind of read this before I get into Lucian so that I have the full history, because I'm very familiar with the text. I've seen it referenced, I've read summaries, but I've never actually dived down and read it for what it is. And I really wanted to see the version by Apuleius, since it's the most classic one. And I can go on to Topos Text, which is an amazing resource. And I wanted to show everyone how to use Topos Text because it's probably, the best English language resource for people interested in the ancient Greek and Latin. And it has such an incredible database to help you go through this stuff. So we're going to have some fun. We're going to read today, hopefully, all of book 1 of Apuleius's The Golden Ass. Now, before I dive in, I do want to talk a little bit about Apuleius. Now, Apuleius is a really interesting figure, a Greek who moves to Italy but travels all across the Mediterranean and is initiated in dozens of various mystery cults. And then around 120, 130, again, it's all highly debatable, Apuleius gets accused of going after and seducing this woman using black magic. And he writes a famous text called the Apologia, which is defending himself from this accusation of black magic. And he winds up getting, he gets out of it. His Apologia works. He doesn't get charged. And he then goes on to write the Latin version of the Golden Ass. And it's highly debatable when it was written. It could have been written anywhere between 130 and his death in 180. But either way, it is the longest Latin novel. It's the only fully extant Latin novel we have, So it's a really important piece of world literature. And we're going to have some fun. So let's get into Apuleius's The Golden Ass. Okay. So this is Topos Text. And you can find this website just by searching Topos Text. And I highly recommend checking this out because they are going to give you very good translations. Like this translation comes from 2013. It's open source. Anyone can check it out. And it's not in that high Victorian English, you know. And also, if you look on things like this, they'll tell you, like all of these locations. If you go over them, they'll show you where in the world these locations are, which is kind of cool. And then sometimes they'll also show you which characters are. Anyway, so we're going to begin here. Apuleius, the Golden Ass, Metamorphoses. Book 1. Apuleius's address to the reader. Now, I'd like to string together various tales in the Milesian style and charm your kindly ear with seductive murmurs, so long as you're ready to be amazed at human forms and fortunes changed radically and then restored in turn in mutual exchange. And don't object to reading Egyptian papyri inscribed by my sly reed from the Nile. I just want to pause for 1 second. So the Milesian style, what he means by this is there's a really famous city at this time in Anatolia called Miletus, and they're famous for a style of poem and story called that becomes known as the Milesian style, of which Apuleius is the Golden Ass is the best preserved version of this. So he's kind of telling you what kind of story this is. And the Milesian style story is you have a bunch of different folk tales or like fairy stories that are all tied together with a loose narrative. Okay? And that's sort of what the Milesian style is. Another example of a story that follows this style would be the Satyricon. Okay? All right. So let's continue. I'll begin. Who am I? I'll tell you briefly. Hymettus near Athens, the isthmus of Corinth, and Spartan mountains Taenarus, happy soil more happily buried forever in other books. That's my lineage. So here he's just giving you various mountains in Greece. The isthmus of Corinth, that's that land bridge that's going to connect the Peloponnese Peninsula to mainland Greece, you know, Spartan Mount Taenarus. Okay. There, as a lad, I served in my first campaigns with the Greek tongue. Later, in Rome, freshly come to Latin studies, I assumed and cultivated the native language without a teacher and with a heap of pains. So there, I beg your indulgence in advance, if, as a crude performer in the exotic speech of the forum, I offend. And in truth, the very fact of a change of voice will answer like a circus rider's skill when needed. We're about to embark on a Greek tale. Reader, attend and find delight. Aristomenes begins his tale in Thessaly, where the roots of my mother's family add to my glory in the famous form of Plutarch, and later his nephew Sextus the philosopher. Thessaly is where I was off to on business. So this is a famous state in Greece. Plutarch is a Platonic philosopher, so is Sextus. Emerging from the perilous mountain tracks and slithery valleys ones and damp meadows and muddy fields, riding a pure white local nag, he being fairly tired, and to chase away my own fatigue from endless sitting with the labor of walking, I dismounted. I rubbed the sweat from his forehead, carefully stroked his ears, loosed his bridle, and led him slowly along at a gentle pace, till the usual and natural remedy of grazing eliminated the inconvenience of his lassitude. While he was at his mobile breakfast, the grass he passed, contorting his head from side to side. I made a third to two travelers who chanced to be a little way ahead. As I tried to hear what they were saying, one of them burst out laughing. Stop telling such absurd and monstrous lies. Hearing this, and my thirst for anything new being what it is, I said, oh, do let me share your conversation. I'm not inquisitive, but I love to know everything, or at least most things. Besides, the charm of a pleasant tale will lighten the path of this hill we're climbing. But this one who laughed merely went on. Now that story was about as true as if you'd said magic spells can make rivers flow backwards, chain the sea, paralyze the wind, halt the sun, squeeze dew from the moon, disperse the stars, banish day, and lengthen night. Here I spoke out more boldly. Don't be annoyed, you who began the tale. Don't weary of spinning out the rest. And to the other, you, with your stubborn mind and cloth ears, might be rejecting something true. By Hercules, it's not too clever if wrong opinion makes you judge as false what seems new to the ear, or strange to the eye, or too hard for the intellect to grasp, but which, on closer investigation, proves not only true, but even obvious. I, last night, competing with friends at dinner, took too large a mouthful of cheese polenta. That soft and gluttonous food stuck in my throat, blocked my windpipe, and I almost died. Yet at Athens, not long ago, in front of the Stoa Poiliki, I saw a juggler swallow a sharp-edged cavalry sword with its lethal blade. Excuse me. And later, I saw the same fellow, after a little donation, ingest a spear, death-dealing ends downward, right to the depths of his guts. And all of a sudden, a beautiful boy swarmed up the wooden bit of the upside-down weapon, where it rose from throat to brow, and danced to dance, all twists and turns, as if he'd no muscle or spine, astounding everyone there. So, cool thing with this website, let's check this out. Okay, so this is a shrine. This is a shrine that would have been in ancient Athens. The Stoa Poikili. Okay, amazing. You'd have said he was that noble snake that clings with its slippery knots to Asclepius's staff, the naughty one he carries with the half sawn off branches. But do go on now, you who started the tale. Tell it again. I'll believe you, not like him, and invite you to dinner with me, the first tavern we come to after reaching town. There's your guaranteed reward. What you promise, he said, is fair and just. I'll repeat what I left unfinished, but first I swear to you by the all-seeing God of the sun, I'm speaking things I know to be true, and you'll have no doubt when you arrive at the next Thessalonian town and find the story on everyone's lips of a happening in plain daylight. But first, so you know who I am, from Aegium. So Aegium, again, we're getting to another small town kind of in Greece. Really cool that they can show you all these places. Wow. Yeah. So this is a kind of on Greece, on the western end of Greece. Wow. Interesting. Okay. And here's how I make my living. I deal in cheese and honey, all that sort of innkeeper stuff, traveling here and there through Boeotia, Aetolia, Thessaly, all Greek states. So when I learned that Hypata, Thessaly's most important town, some fresh cheese with a fine flavor was being sold at a very good price, I rushed there in a hurry to buy the lot. But as usual, I went left foot first, and my hopes of profits were dashed. A wholesale dealer called Lupus had snapped it up the day before. So, exhausted after my useless chase, I started to walk to the baths as Venus began to shine. Socrates' misfortune. Suddenly, I caught sight of my old friend Socrates, sitting on the ground, half concealed in a ragged cloak, so pale I hardly knew him, sadly thin and shrunken, like one of those fate discards to beg at street corners. So, of course, they're talking about the great philosopher Socrates. In that state, even though I knew him well, I approached him with doubt in my mind. Well, Socrates, my friend, what's happened? How dreadful you look. What shame. Back home, they've already mourned and given you up for dead. By the provincial judge's decree, guardians have been appointed for your children and your wife, the funeral service done, her looks marred by endless tears and grief. Her sight, nearly lost from weeping, is being urged by her parents to ease the family misfortune with the joy of a fresh marriage. And here you are, looking like a ghost, to our utter shame. Aristomenes, he said, you can't know the slippery turns of fortune. So they're talking about Fortuna, right? The goddess. The shifting assaults, the string of reverses. With that, he threw his tattered cloak over a face that long since had blushed with embarrassment, leaving the rest of himself from navel to thighs bare. I could endure the sight of such terrible suffering no longer, grasped him and tried to set him on his feet. But he remained as he was, his head shrouded, and cried, no, no, let fate have more joy of the spoils she puts on display. I made him follow me, and removing one or two of my garments, clothed them hastily, or rather hid him, then dragged him off to the baths and trice. I myself found what was needed for oiling and drying, and with effort scraped off the solid layers of dirt that done. I carried him off to an inn, tired myself, supporting his exhausted frame with some effort. I laid him on the bed, filled him with food, relaxed him with wine, soothed him with talk. Now he was ready for conversation, laughter, a witty joke, even some modest repartee, when suddenly a painful sob rose from the depths of his chest, and he beat away his brow savagely with his hand. Woe is me, he cried. I was chasing after the delights of a famous gladiatorial show when I fell into this misfortune. For, as you know well, I'd gone to Macedonia on a business trip. That's northern Greece. And after 9 months laboring there, I was on my way back home a wealthier man. Just before I reached Larissa, where I was going to watch the show, by the way, walking along a rough and desolate valley, I was attacked by fierce bandits and stripped of all I had. At last I escaped, weak as I was, and reached an inn belonging to a mature yet very attractive woman named Mario. Oh, wow. Oh, or Meroi. Wow. So something we got to notice about this name, this immediately makes me think of the star nymphs. Meroi could also, it really makes me think of Meriope or Asterope. Anyway, really interesting name for a woman. And told her about my lengthy journey, my desire for home, and the wretched robbery. She treated me more than kindly with a welcome and generous meal, and quickly aroused by lust, steered me to her bed. At once I was done for, the moment I slept with her. That one bout of sex infected me with a long and pestilential relationship. She even had the clothes those kind robbers left me, and the meager wages I've earned, heaving sacks while I still could, until at last evil fortune and my good wife reduced me to the state you saw not long ago. Okay, that's pretty funny. Poor Socrates, he's got himself, taken by this woman, Marioi, or Meroi. Ridiculous. Okay, let's continue. Sorry. So Pollux, what do they mean by Pollux here? I think that's just the god of light. Let me see. Pollux. Yeah, Castor and Pollux and Asclepius, right? These are people who are on the Argonautica. Okay. All right. By Pollux, I said, you deserve the worst. If there's anything worse than what you got for preferring the joys of Venus and a wrinkled whore to your home and kids. But shocked and stunned, he placed his index finger to his lips. Quiet, quiet, he said, then glancing round, making sure it was safe to speak. Beware of a woman with magic powers, lest your intemperate speech do you a mischief. Really, I said. What sort of woman is this high and mighty innkeeper? A witch, he said, with divine powers to lower the sky and halt the globe, make fountains stone, melt the mountains, raise ghosts and summon the gods, extinguish the stars, and illuminate Tartarus itself. That's the underworld. Oh, come, said I. Dispense with the melodrama. Away with the stage scenery. Use the common tongue. Do you, he replied, wish to hear one or two or more of her doings? Because the fact she can make all men fall for her, and not just the locals, but Indians and the Ethiopians, savages of the Orient and Occident, apologies, and even men who live on the opposite side of the earth, that's only a tithe of her art, the merest bagatelle. Just listen to what she's perpetrated in front of witnesses. One of her lovers had misbehaved with someone else. So with a single word, she changed him into a beaver, a creature that, fearing capture, escapes from the hunters by biting off its own testicles to confuse the hounds with their scent. And she intended the same thing for him, for having it cut off with another woman. Wow. This immediately makes me think of, the Corybantes and the followers of Gallus and Attis, those people who would go through those rites of castration. It's calling them beavers. Interesting. Okay. Then there was another innkeeper nearby in competition, and she changed him into a frog. Now the old man swims in a vat of his own wine, hides in the dregs, and calls out humbly to his past customers with raucous croaks. And because he spoke against her, she turned a lawyer into a sheep, and now as a sheep he pleads his case. When the wife of a lover of hers, who was carrying at the time, insulted her wittily, she condemned her to perpetual pregnancy by closing her womb to prevent the birth. And according to everyone's computation, that poor woman's been burdening for 8 years or more, and she's as big as an elephant. Oh my gosh, the poor woman, wow. As it kept happening, and many were harmed, public indignation grew, and the people decreed the severest punishment, stoning to death next day. But with the power of her chanting, she thwarted their plan, just as Medea, in that one short day she won from Creon, consumed his daughter, his palace, and the old king himself in flames from the golden crown, so Marioi, by chanting necromantic rites in a ditch, as she told me herself when she was drunk, shut all the people in their houses with the dumb force of her magic powers. Oh, wow. She went full Medea on these folks. She dug her necromantic ditch like we see in the Odyssey, right? Wow. And referencing Creon, right? What does Medea do to Creon? She has his daughter kill him, burn him alive, and then she burns down his city and his palace. Oof. Oof. We got some powerful witchcraft magic here, folks. For 2 whole days, not one of them could break the locks, rip open the doors, or even dig a way through the walls, until at last, at everyone's mutual urging, they called out, swearing a solemn oath not to lay hands on her themselves, and to come to her defense and save her, if anyone tried to do so. Thus propitiated, she freed the whole town. But as for the author of the original decree, she snatched him up in the dead of night with his whole house, that's walls and floor and foundations entire, and shifted them, the doors still locked, 100 miles to another town, on the top of a rugged and arid mountain. And since the densely packed homes of those folk left no room for the new guest, she dropped the house in front of the gates and vanished. So she stole their house and threw it 1,000 miles to the next city on top of a mountain. Wow. All right. What you relate is marvelous, dear Socrates, I said, and wild. In short, you've roused no little anxiety, even fear in me too. I'm struck with no mere pebble here, but a spear, lest with the aid of those magic forces that old woman might have heard our conversation. So let's go to bed early, and weariness relieved by sleep, leave before dawn, and get as far away as we can. While I was still relaying sound advice, the good Socrates, gripped by the effects of this unaccustomed tippling and his great exhaustion, was already asleep and snoring. I shut the door tight, slid home the bolts, and even pushed my bed hard against the doorframe, and flew myself down on top. At first from fear I lay awake for a while. Then about midnight I shut my eyes somewhat. I had just fallen asleep when it seemed the door suddenly burst open. With great violence than any burglar could achieve, the hinges were shattered and torn from their sockets, and the door hurled to the ground. My bed, being low with a dodgy foot and its wood rotten, collapsed from the force of such violence, and I rolled out and struck the floor while the bed landed upside down on top, hiding and covering me. Then I felt that natural phenomenon where certain emotions are expressed through their contraries. At that instant, just as tears will often flow from joy, I couldn't keep myself from laughing at being turned from Aristomenes to a tortoise, hurled to the floor. From a corner of my eye, beneath the welcome protection of my bed, I watched the two women of rather ripe years. One bore a lighted lamp, the other a sponge and naked blade. Thus equipped, they circled the soundly sleeping Socrates. The one with the sword spoke. Panthea, my sister, this is my dear Endymion, my Ganymede, who made sport with my youth, day and night, who not only scorned my secret love insultingly, but even plotted to escape. All right, so Panthea. So Panthea, right? This is the name of one of the sisters, so that's the sister. Endymion, we're talking about one of these, was the son of Zeus, right? And Selene, Endymion and Selene is referencing that famous story for those of you who aren't aware. And of course, Ganymede is the cupbearer. So this is that lost kind of love, right? That strive, that one you obsess over. That's the kind of reference that they're making. Am I really to be deserted like Calypso by a cunning Ulysses and condemned in turn to weep in everlasting loneliness? Wow, right? So we know the story of Ulysses. Then she stretched out her hand and pointed me out to her friend Panthea. And this is his good counselor Aristomenes, who was the author of his escape and now lies close to death, stretched on the ground, sprawled beneath his little bed, watching it all. He thinks he's going to recount his insults to me with impunity. I'll make him regret his past jibes and his present nosiness later, if not sooner, if not right now. When I heard that, my wretched flesh dissolved in a cold sweat. My guts trembled and quaked, till the bed on my back shaken by my quivering swayed and lapped about. Well then, sister, gentle Panthea replied, why not grab him first, and like the Bacchantes, tear him limb from limb, or tie him up at least and cut his balls off. So the Bacchantes, the followers of Dionysus, right? The Bacchae, the Maenads. Wow. Marioe, for I realized it was truly her in line with Socrates' tale, replied, no, let him survive, at least to cover this wretch's corpse with a little earth. And with that she pushed Socrates' head to the side and buried her blade in the left of his neck, all the way to the hilt. Then she held a flask of leather against the wound and carefully collected the spurt of blood, so not a single drop was visible anywhere. I saw all this with my very own eyes. Next, so as not to deviate, I suppose, from the sacrificial rites, she stuck her right hand into the wound, right down to his innards. Oh, wow. Felt for my poor comrade's heart and plucked it out. At this, a sort of cry rose from his windpipe, slashed by the weapon's stroke, or at least an indistinct gurgle, and he poured out his life's breath. Panthea stopped the gaping wound with her sponge, saying, O sponge born in the sea, take care not to fall in the river. And with this they abandoned him, removed my bed, spread their feet, squatted over my face, and discharged their bladders till I was drenched with the stream of the foulest urine. Holy crap. Holy whoa. What did I just read? Okay, now Marioi and Panthea, these are witches you do not mess with. They kicked the door down, trapped Aristomenes under all of those beds. Then they took Socrates, cut a hole in his shoulder, reached down and ripped his heart out, slit his throat, then took a sponge and stopped all the bleeding. Then, as a final goodbye, they pulled Aristomenes out from under those beds and pissed in his face. Holy, that's so wild. Okay. No sooner had they exited the threshold than the door, untouched, swung back to its original position. The hinges settled back in their sockets. The brackets returned to the posts, and the bolts slid home. But I remained where I was, sprawled on the ground, inanimate, naked, cold, and covered in piss, as if I just emerged from my mother's womb. No, it was truly more like being half dead, but also in truth, my own survivor, a posthumous child, or rather a sure candidate for crucifixion. When he's found in the morning, I said to myself, his throat cut, what will happen to you? If you tell the truth, who on earth will believe it? You could at least have shouted for help. If a great man like you couldn't handle the women by yourself, a man has his throat cut before your eyes and you do nothing? And if you say it was robbers, why wouldn't they have killed you too? Why would their savagery spare you as a witness to the crime to inform on them? So, having escaped death, you can go and meet it again? As night crept forwards towards day, I kept turning it over in my mind. I decided the best thing to do was to sneak off just before dawn and hit the road with tremulous steps. I picked up my little bag, pushed the key in the lock, and tried to slide back the bolts. But that good and faithful door, which in the night had unlocked of its own accord, only opened at last after much labor and endless twiddling of the key. The porter was lying on the ground at the entrance to the inn, still half asleep when I cried, "Hey there, where are you? Open the gate. I want to be gone by daybreak." "What?" he's answered. "Don't you know the road's thick with brigands? Who goes traveling at this hour of the night? Even if you've a crime on your conscience and want to die, I'm not pumpkin-headed enough to let you." "Dawn's not far off," I said. "And anyway, what can robbers take from me, an utter pauper? Or are you not aware, ignoramus, that even a dozen wrestling masters can't despoil a naked man?" Then, half conscious and weak with sleep, he turned over on his other side, saying, "How do I know you haven't slit the throat of that traveler you were with last night and are doing a runner to save yourself?" In an instant, I know I saw the earth gape wide, and there was the pit of Tartarus with dog-headed Cerberus ready to eat me. I thought how sweet Marioi had spared my throat, not for mercy, but in her cruelty had reserved me for crucifixion. So I slipped back to the bedroom and reflected on the quickest way to die. Since fate had left me no other weapon but my little bed, I talked to it. Now, my little cot, dear friend of mine, who've suffered so many tribulations with me, and know and can judge what went on last night, and the only witness I could summon to testify to my innocence at my trial, I'm in a hurry to die, so be the instrument that will save me. With this, I began to unravel the cord that laced its frame. Then I threw one end over a little beam that stuck out into the room below the window, and tied it fast. I made a noose in the other end, scrambled up on the bed, got high enough from the drop to work, and struck my head through the noose. With one foot, I kicked away the support I stood on, so my weight on the cord would squeeze my throat tight and stop me breathing. But in a tris, the rope, which was old and rotten, broke, and I crashed down on top of Socrates, who was lying there beside me, and rolled with him onto the ground. Oh, wow. But behold, at that moment the porter arrived, shouting loudly, "Hey, you! In the middle of the night! You can't wait to take off! Now here you are under the covers snoring." Then Socrates, woken by our fall, or by the fellow's raucous yelling, got to his feet first, saying, "It's no wonder guests hate porters, since here's this inquisitive chap bursting in importunately into our room after stealing something, no doubt, and waking me, weak as I was, out of a lovely sleep with his monstrous din." I leapt up eagerly, filled with unexpected joy, and cried, "Behold our faithful porter! Here's my friend, as dear as father or brother, whom you in your drunken state accused me slanderously of murdering." And I straightway hugged Socrates and started kissing him. But he, stunned by the vile stench of the liquid those monsters had drenched me with, shoved me off violently. "Away with you," he cried. "You stink like the foulest sewer." Then began to ask as a friend, with the reason for the mess. I invented some absurd, some miserable little joke on the spur of the moment, and drew his attention away again to another subject of conversation. Then clasping him, I said, "Why don't we go now and grasp the chance of an early morning amble?" And I picked up my little bag, paid the bill for our stay at the inn, and off we went. Socrates is death. We were quite a way off before the sun rose, lighting everything. Carefully, since I was curious, I examined the place on my friend's neck where I'd seen the blade enter. I said to myself, "You're mad. You were in your cups and sodden with wine and had a dreadful nightmare. Look, Socrates is sound and whole, totally unscathed. Where are the wound and the sponge? Where's the deep and recent scar?" I turned to him. "Those doctors are not without merit who say that swollen with food and drink, we have wild and oppressive dreams. Take me now. I took too much to drink last evening, and a bad night brought such dire and violent visions. I still feel as though I was spattered, polluted with human blood." He grinned at that. "It's piss, not blood, you're soaked with. I dreamed too that my throat was cut. I felt the pain in my neck and even thought my heart had been torn from my body. And now I'm still short of breath and my knees are trembling and I'm staggering along and I need a bite to eat to restore my spirits." "Here's breakfast," I said, "all ready for you." And I swung the sack from my shoulder and quickly handed him bread and cheese. "Let's sit by that plane tree," I said. Having done so, I took something from the sack for myself and watched him eating avidly, but visibly weaker, somehow more drawn and emaciated, and with the pallor of boxwood. In short, the color of his flesh was so disturbing, it conjured up the vision of those furies of the night before. And my terror was such, the first bit of bread I took, though only a small one, struck in my throat, and it wouldn't go down or come back up. The absence of anyone else on the road added to my fear. Who could believe my companion was murdered and I was innocent? Now he, when he had enough, began to feel quite thirsty. Since he gobbled the best part of a whole cheese in his eagerness, a gentle stream flowed sluggishly, not far from the plane tree's roots, following on through a quiet pool, the color of glass or silver. "Here," I cried, "quench your thirst with the milky waters of this spring." He rose, and after a brief search for a level place at the edge of the bank, he sank down on his knees and bent forward, ready to drink. But his lips had not yet touched the surface of the water when in a trice the wound in his throat gaped open, and out flew the sponge with a little trickle of blood. Then his lifeless body pitched forward, almost into the stream, except that I caught at one of his legs and with a mighty effort dragged him higher onto the bank. I mourned for him there as much as circumstance allowed, and covered him with the sandy soil to rest there forever beside the water. Then, trembling, fearful of my life, I fled through a remote and pathless country, like a man with murder on his conscience, abandoning home and country, embracing voluntary exile. Now I live in Aetolia, and I'm married again. So Aristomenes' story ended, but his friend who had absently refused to believe a word from the very start said, "There was never a taller tale, never a more absurd mendacity." And he turned to me. "You are a cultured chap, as your clothes and manners show. Can you credit a fable like that?" I replied, "I judge that nothing's impossible, and whatever the fates decide is what happens to mortal men. Now, I and you and everyone experience many a strange and almost incredible event that is unbelievable when told to someone who wasn't there. And as for Aristomenes, not only do I believe him, but by Hercules, I thank him greatly for amusing us with his charming and delightful tale. I forgot about the pain of travel and wasn't bored on that last rough stretch of road. And I think the horse is happy too, since without him tiring, I've been carried all the way to the city gate here, not by his back, but by my ears." Sorry. Milo's house. That was the end of our conversation and our shared journey. My two companions turned to the left towards a nearby farm while I approached the first inn I found on entering the town. I immediately inquired of the old women who kept the inn, "Is this Hypata?" She nodded. "Do you know a prominent citizen named Milo?" "Milo's certainly prominent," she replied, "since his house sticks out beyond the city limits." Joking apart, I said, "Tell me, good mother, what sort he is and where he lives." "Do you see," she answered, "that row of windows facing the city and the door on the other side opening on the alley nearby? That's where your Milo lives, with piles of money, heaps of wealth, but a man truly famed for his total avarice, his companion in misery, no servants except a little maid, and dresses like a beggar when he goes out." I responded to this with a laugh. My friend Demeus was certainly kind and thoughtful, sending me off with a letter of introduction to a man like that. At least there'll be no smoking fires or cooking fumes to fear. And with that, I walked to the house and found the entrance. The door was stoutly bolted, so I banged and shouted. At long last, the girl appeared. "Well, you've certainly given the door a drubbing. Where's your pledge for the loan? Or are you the only man who doesn't know we only take gold and silver?" "No, no," I replied. "Just say if your master's home." "Well, why do you want him then?" "I've a letter for him from Demeus of Corinth." "Wait right here," she said, "while I announce you." And with that, she bolted the door again and vanished into the house. Soon she returned, flung open the door and proclaimed, "He says to come in." In I went and found him reclining on a little couch and just about to start his supper. His wife sat beside him, and there was a table with nothing on it, to which he gestured, saying, "Welcome to my house." "Thank you," I said, and straightway handed him Demeus's letter. And he read it swiftly, saying, "And thanks to my friend Demeus for sending me such a guest." With that, he ordered his wife to rise and offered me her place. I hesitated modestly, but he gripped the hem of my tunic and dragged me down. "Sit here," he said. "For fear of burglary, we lack more chairs and things." I sat, and he went on. "I guess from your fine appearance and almost bashful courtesy that you come of a good family, and dear Demeus says so, too, in his letter. So I beg you not to spurn the meagerness of our little hovel. You can have that room right there, a plain and honest one. I hope you'll be pleased to stay. You'll not only make our house greater by the honor of your presence, but you'll acquire greater worth if you rest content with our tiny hearth and emulate the virtue of your father's namesake, Theseus." Right? Theseus, one of the great Greek heroes. "He who did not scorn the slight hospitality of old Hecale. And he summoned the maid. Take our guest bags, Fotis, at once, and put them safe in that bedroom. And bring a flask of oil and towels, whatever else he'll need. Then show my guests the nearest baths." He had a long and arduous journey, and he's tired. Hearing this, I recognized Milo's parsimonious ways, but though hungry, I wished to humor him and said, "Those things accompany me on my travels, and I've no need of more. I can easily ask directions to the baths. What concerns me most is my horse, whose efforts have brought me here. So, Fotis, take these coins and buy him some oats and hay." Once this was underway and my belongings placed in the room, I set off for the baths alone. But first, I headed for the market, wanting to secure my supper. I saw plenty of fine fish on display, but when I asked the price and was told what they cost, I haggled, buying a gold coin's worth for 20% less. Just as I was moving on, I encountered Pythias, who had been a student with me in Athens. He recognized me and gave me a friendly embrace, though it had all been long ago, rushing up and kissing me affectionately. "By Pollux, Lucius, my friend, it is ages since I saw you last. It was when we said goodbye to Clytius, our teacher, by Hercules. What brings you here in your travels?" "I'll tell you tomorrow," I said. "But what's this? Congratulations! You've attendants with rods of office, and you're dressed as a magistrate." "I'm the inspector of markets, controller of supplies, and if you want help in purchasing anything, I'm your man." "Thanks, but there's no need," I said, having bought enough fish for supper. But Pythias saw my basket and poked the fish to inspect them. "What did you pay for this stuff?" he asked. I twisted the man's arm and he charged me 20 denarii, I said. On hearing this, he grabbed my arm and dragged me back to the market. "Which of the fish merchants," he said, "did you buy that rubbish from?" I pointed out a little old man sitting in a corner, and Pythias immediately began berating him in the harsh tones befitting authority. "Now you even cheat visitors like this friend of mine? You mark up worthless goods to stupid prices, reduce Hypata, the flower of Thessaly, to the equivalent of a barren rock in the desert, with the costliness of your wares, but don't think you'll get away with it. I'll show you how this magistrate deals with rogues." And he emptied my basket out on the pavement and ordered an assistant to crush them to a pulp with his feet. Satisfied with this stern display of morality, my friend Pythias advised me to leave, saying, "Lucius, it's enough that I've chastised the fellow." Astonished, utterly stupefied by this turn of events, I carried on to the baths, robbed of money and supper by the worldly wise authoritativeness of my erstwhile fellow student. After bathing, I returned to Milo's house and my room. Weird. Suddenly, the maid Fotis appeared. "Your host invites you to join him," she said. Already acquainted with Milo's thrift, I made a polite excuse, saying my recovery from the rigors of the journey required sleep, not food. On hearing this, Milo himself came to persuade me and tugged me along after him gently. When I hesitated and discreetly resisted, he said, "I'll not leave off till you do." And following this with an oath, he showed himself so stubborn I had to give in against my will, while he led me off to that little couch of his and sat me down. "How's my friend Demeas?" he asked. "How's his wife? How are the children? How are the servants?" I answered every question. He inquired more closely into the reasons for my journey, and when I explained it all with care, he started again regarding my hometown, the prominent citizens, and eventually even the governor himself. Noticing at last that after the cruel hardship of my travels, I was utterly exhausted by the constant stream of chatter, it would come to stop mid-sentence, so far gone that I was muttering inarticulately or jerking awake with a sudden cry, he let me escape to bed. I stumbled away from that vile old man's wordy but worthless banquet, and full of yarns, not food, having dined on nothing but conversation, dragged myself to my room and gave myself up to the sleep I craved. Aunt Burena. Aunt Burena. As soon as darkness had dispersed and the rising sun brought daylight, I emerged from sleep in bed, anxious as ever to investigate, with all my excessive eagerness, the rare and marvelous, in knowing that there I was in the heart of Thessaly, the home of those magic arts whose powerful spells are praised throughout the world, and remembering that my dear friend Aristomenes' tale was set in this very city, I was possessed with desire and impatience. and set out to examine everything carefully. Nothing I saw in that city seemed to me to be what it was, but everything I thought had been transformed by some dreadful incantation. The rocks I came across were petrified human beings. The birds I heard were people with feathers. The trees round the city walls were the same with leaves, and the waters in the fountains had flowed with human veins, had flowed from human veins. Soon the statues and images would start to walk, and the walks to talk, and the walls to talk, and the oxen and other cattle to prophecy, and an oracle would speak from the very sky, out of the face of the sun. I was in such a state of awe, or rather stupefied by the torments of longing, that though I could find not a trace, not a shred of what I yearned to see, I still kept wandering from place to place, like a man determined on spending his money somehow or other. I stumbled upon the market, and there a woman was passing by with a large crowd of servants. I quickened my pace and caught up with her. The gold settings of her jewels and the gold threads woven into her dress marked her out as the wife of some wealthy person. An old man weighed down by the years was clinging to her arm, who, the moment he caught sight of me, cried, "It's Lucius, by Hercules, it's Lucius." He embraced me and whispered something in the woman's ear. "Why don't you go and kiss your aunt?" he said. I blushed, replying, "I'm embarrassed to greet a woman I don't know," and stood there with my eyes on the ground. But she turned and stared at me. He inherited his virtue from his pure and sainted mother, Salvia. And the physical resemblance is clear. Not unusually tall, slight yet vigorous, a reddish complexion, tawny hair, quiet, plainly cut. The same alert blue-gray eyes with a brilliant gaze like an eagle's, the glowing face, the attractive, unaffected way of walking. "Lucius," she said, "I raised you with these very hands, naturally. Since I am not just a close relative of your mother's, I was brought up with her, and we're both descendants of Plutarch's family, suckled together by the same wet nurse, and reared in the bonds of sisterhood. Only our position in society differentiates us. Since she married an eminent man, I a private citizen. I am Birenia, whose name I think you'll often have heard among those who educated you. So come and trust yourself to my hospitality, or rather to a house you must treat just like your own." Once my blushes had receded, I replied, "I ought not to desert Milo, my host, without a reason, aunt. But I'll try hard to do what I can without failing my obligations. Whenever I've reason to come this way, I'll call on you without fail." While we were talking in this manner, we had walked a short distance and reached Birena's house. At Birena's house, the reception hall, the atrium, was especially beautiful, with a column at each corner, on which stood a statue of a palm-bearing goddess, wings outspread, the motionless, dew-wet feet barely touching the polished surface of the spinning globe, so as to appear in flight, not stationary. Then a Parian marble at the center to balance these on absolute excellent work, carved in the likeness of Diana, running towards you as you entered, awing you with her divine majesty, her tunic sculpted by the wind. Diana Artemis, right? Goddess of the hunt and the moon. There were hounds of marble too, protecting her flanks, their eyes menacing, ears pricked, nostrils flaring, and jaws open so fiercely that if the sound of barking had reached you from nearby, you'd have thought it had emerged from the marble. And then the noted artist had shown the best proof of his skill by having the dogs leap up, so that with chests held high and their rear paws firm on the ground, with their blossoming in stone, with their front ones yet seemed to be bounding forward. Behind the goddess was a cave in the rock, with moss and grass and leaves, blushed with vines everywhere, and with little trees blossoming in stone. Inside the cavern, the statue's reflection shone from the polished marble, and under its lip hung apples and skillfully carved grapes. Art emulating nature in a work where a gently shimmering wave flowed beneath the goddess's feet. You would have thought the grapes hanging there in reflection possessed the quality of movement, besides those other aspects of reality. Actaeon was represented too, among the marble foliage, both in the stone and mirrored in the water, leaning towards the goddess, waiting with eager gaze for her to step into the pool, at the very moment with his transformation into a stag. Actaeon was the one who fell in love with Diana and pursued her. As I examined the statuary time and again with intense delight, Birenna spoke. Everything you see is yours, she said, and with that she ordered the rest to leave so we could talk in private. When they had been dismissed, she said, My dear Lucius, I swear by this goddess herself that I am very anxious and fearful for you, as if you were my own son, and I want to forewarn you well in advance. Beware especially of the evil arts and immoral charms of that woman, Pamphile, the wife of Milo, who you say is your host. They call her the first among witches, mistress of every kind of fatal charm, who by breathing on twigs and pebbles and such like can drown all the light of the starlight globe in the depths of Tartarus and plunge the whole world into primal chaos. No sooner does she spy a handsome young man than, captivated by his looks, she directs her gaze and all her desire towards him. She sows the seeds of seduction, invades his mind, and fetters him with the eternal shackles of raging passion. That any who are unwilling, rendered loathsome by their reluctance, in a trice she turns them into a rock or a sheep or some other creature. There are even those she annihilates completely. That's why I fear for you and warn you to take care. She's always on heat, and you are young and handsome enough to suit. All this Birenna told me with great concern. Wow. The charms of Fotis. But my curiosity was aroused, and as soon as I heard the word magic, instead of being cautious of Pamphile, I longed to embark willingly and of my own accord on an apprenticeship in such matters, whatever the cost, and go leaping headlong into the deepest pit. Mad with impatience, I loosed myself at last from Birenna's clasp, as from handcuffs, added a quick farewell, and fled swiftly back to Milo's house. Oh wow, he's gonna go sign up, try to get lessons from this witch. Beautiful. While speeding along like a man out of his mind, I kept talking to myself. Now, Lucius, keep your wits about you and stay in control. This is the opportunity you've been waiting for. You'll have your fill of marvelous adventures you've always wanted. Forget your childish fears and get to grips with things vigorously. Hand to hand, avoid any dallying with your hostess, and respect religiously good Milo's marriage bed, though you can chase Fotis, the maid, as much as you wish. After all, she's pretty to look at, has playful ways, and she's as sharp as a needle. Last night, when you were giving away to drowsiness, she led you to the bedroom in a friendly way, turned down the sheets seductively, tucked you in quite tenderly, kissing you on the head, showed by her expression how reluctant she was to leave, and then she turned and looked back several times. So that seems good and promising, quite favorable even, though it may be bad for your health. Let Fotis be seduced. I'd arrived at Milo's door, still debating with myself, and, as I say, making the decision with my feet. I found that neither Milo nor his wife were at home, but only darling Fotis. She was preparing diced innards for stuffing, minced meat, soup from the offal, and what I'd already divined with my nostrils, a wonderfully tasty sausage. She was neatly dressed in a linen tunic, gathered in with a bright red band beneath her breasts, rotating the cooking pot in her flower-like fingers, stirring it with a circular motion, at the same time flexing her body smoothly, her hips subtly wiggling, her supple spine gently shaking, rippling delicately. I was transfixed by the sight, completely stunned. I simply stood, and so did that which a moment before had been limply asleep. At last I spoke. How beautifully, how delightfully, my dear Fotis, your hips rotate that little pot. What a lovely treat you're about. Happy and blessed for sure, that man whom you'd allow a dip of his little finger. With a ready and witty tongue she replied, away with you, my lad. Keep far away from the heat. If the tiniest flame should touch you even lightly, you'll be badly burned, and no one but me would be able to quench the blaze. I who season things sweetly, and know how to make a stew or a bed to please. Saying this, she turned towards me and laughed. But I refused to go till I diligently explored every aspect of her appearance. My first delight has also been, why speak of anything else? The hair on a woman's head, to consider it carefully first in public and enjoy it later at home. The reason behind this preference of mine is perfectly well considered, namely that as the main part of the body openly and cleanly seen, it is the first thing to meet the eyes, and then what gaily colored clothes do the rest of the person. Its own natural beauty does for the head. And finally, when women wish to prove their true loveliness, they remove their dresses, slip off their garments, wishing to show their naked forms, knowing they will be better liked for the blushing glow of their skin than the gilded tissues of silk. But in truth, though it's forbidden to say so, and I hope as such no dreadful example of it ever occurs, if you were to shave the hair from the head of the most marvelously beautiful woman and leave her face naked of its adornment, though she had come down from heaven, was born of the sea, nurtured by the waves, even though I say she were Venus herself, ringed by the choir of graces with a whole throng of cupids at their side, wearing that famous belt, fragrant with cinnamon and dripping balsam. If she were bald as a coot, she'd not even please a husband like Vulcan. I beg to differ. I really beg to differ. Short hair can be super cute on people. Come on, dude. Wow. Ridiculous. But when her hair gleams with its own dear color and brilliant sheen, when it flames to life in the sun's rays or softly reflects them, and varying in shades displays contrasting charms, now shining gold masked in smooth honeyed shadows, now with raven blackness, imitating the purple collar of a pigeon's neck, or when it's glossed with Arabian oils and parted with a finely toothed comb, caught up behind to greet a lover's eyes, and like a mirror reflect a more pleasing image than reality, or when bunched up its many tresses crown her head, or released in long waves flow down her back. In the end, such is the glory of a woman's hair that though she adorns herself with garments and gold and gems and other finery, unless her hair is groomed, she cannot be called well dressed. Okay, Lucius, you got quite the hair fetish. I gotta call it out. As for my Fotis, her hair was not elaborate, but its casualness added charm. Her soft, luxuriant tresses were so loosened to hang over her neck, to cover her shoulders and rest a moment on the slightly curved hem of her tunic, then gathered in a mass at the ends and fastened in a knot on the top of her head. I could bear no longer the excruciating torment of such intense delight, but rushing at her, I planted the sweetest of kisses on the place where her hair rose towards the crown of her head. She twisted her neck towards me then and turned to me with a sidelong glance of those sharp eyes. Oh, you child, she said, bittersweet the taste you sample. Take care not to feel a lasting ache from eating too sugary a honey. Oh, wow. She's warning him. What matter, my jester, I replied. If you'll relieve me a little with a little kiss, I'm ready to be stretched out over the flame and roasted. And with that, I clasped her tight and started to kiss her. Her ardor now began to rival my own, mounting to an equal crescendo of passion. Her mouth opened. Her breath was like cinnamon. Her tongue darted against mine with a taste of nectar and unrestrained desire. I'm dying, I grasped. I'm already lost unless you show mercy. After kissing me again, she answered, don't despair.
Since we both want the one thing, I'm your slave. You won't have to wait much longer. When they light the torches tonight, I'll come to your room. Off with you now and gather your strength, since I'll be battling with you all night, courageously and with spirit. Wildness. All right. Diophanes the Chaldean. After this banter, we parted. It had just turned noon when some gifts arrived from Gehenna: a succulent pig, 5 chickens, and a cask of expensive old wine. So I summoned Photis. Behold, Bacchus, the prompter and arms bearer of Venus, has appeared as well. We should drink all this wine today to quench modesty's reticence and inculcate spirit and vigor into our games. The only provision Venus barks requires are enough oil in the lamp and enough wine in the cup to see us through the night. The rest of the day was devoted to bathing, then supper. I had been invited to join good Milo's elegant little table, and remembering Gehenna's warning, seated myself as far as I could to avoid his wife's gaze, and as fearful whenever I glanced at her face, as if I were staring into Lake Avernus, one of the lakes of the underworld. I kept turning around to look at Photis serving, and that restored my spirits. Evening came, and Pamphile looked at the lamp. What a monstrous rainstorm we'll have tomorrow. When her husband asked her how she knew, she replied the lamp had told her. Milo replied with a laugh. We're nursing mighty Sibyl indeed in that light, one that looks on all heaven's affairs and the sun itself, from the crow's nest of the lampstand. To this I retorted, it's my first experience of this kind of divination, but it's no surprise that your tiny flame, lit by human hands, still retains awareness of that greater celestial fire, as if it was its begetter. Thus, by divine presentiment, it knows and can proclaim to us whatever that orb will enact in the zenith. Now at Corinth, where I live, there's a Chaldean astrologer causing universal uproar in the city with his marvelous oracles, collecting donations for his public declarations of arcane fate. He predicts which days are favorable for a successful marriage, or for building lasting foundations to a wall, which days are good for business or suitable for a journey, or opportune for sailing. When I asked him about the outcome of this trip of mine, he gave several odd and quite contradictory replies. On the one hand, it appears my reputation will truly grow. On the other hand, my future will be a long story, one in several volumes, a tale no one will believe. At this, Milo asked with a smile, what does this Chaldean of yours look like, and what's he called? He's tall, I replied, and rather swarthy, Diophanes by name. That's him, he said, the very man. He's been here too, handing out the same kinds of prophecies to various people. He's amassed rich profits, not just small donations when the poor man met with a perverse, or should I say, vicious change of fortune. One day, surrounded by a crowd of citizens, he was telling the audience their fate as they clustered about him, when a salesman called Curdo appeared, needing to know the right day to travel. Diophanes chose one day and told him. Well, Curdo had just slapped down his purse, pouring out his money, and counted out 4 gold coins worth as payment for the embrace, and made the young man sit beside him, so astonished and dumbfounded that he forgot what he was about. I hoped you'd get here, he said. When did you arrive? Yesterday evening, the other said. But now your turn, dear fellow. After you sailed in haste from Euboea, how did the journey go? By sea and land. Then Diophanes, our sublime Chaldean, his senses still awry, answered, without thinking, would that our enemies, all those hostile to us, might experience so dreadful, so truly Odyssean a purgation. First, the ship we sailed on was blasted by gales on every side, lost its rudder, was beached after much labor on the further shore, then sank straight to the bottom. We lost everything, but barely managed to swim to land. And then, when we were given by friends from kindness or strangers out of pity, was stolen from us by a band of brigands, and Argonatus, my only brother, while defending us against their fierce assault, had his throat cut, poor wretch, before my very eyes. He was in the midst of this dreadful tale, when all of us standing there fell about with laughter. For Curdo, the salesman, snatched up the coins meant to pay for his prophecy and ran off as fast as his legs would carry him. It was only then that Diophanes came to his senses and realized, at last, the disaster his lapse of mind had caused. So I hoped, young Lucius, that our Chaldean has told you, if no one else, the truth. May you be fortunate, and may your journey prove fair. Okay. I think I'm actually going to end here. I was talking a little too much and didn't realize we had started on to book 2. So we're going to begin next day with the chapter 215, A Night with Fotis. That'll be a lot of fun. So I hope you guys have been enjoying this reading of The Golden Ass. Definitely a totally interesting tale, a lot of fun, a lot of wildness. The witches at the beginning with Aristomenes, that story I will never forget. Oh my gosh. Marioi and Panthea, my gosh. It was just too funny. Aristomenes getting pissed on. And then, Socrates holding himself together just long enough to get out of the city and then falling to pieces. Too funny. All right. Well, this was amazing. And we'll be back and we'll see what happens to Lucius with this mysterious Fotis. I have a feeling that our man is underestimating Fotis. He's avoiding the master, right? The queen, right? The wife. What's her name now? Philomene? I can't remember her name. But anyway, he's avoiding his host's Milo's wife. And he's chasing after Fotis. But I have a feeling that, we're going to see some wild magic from Fotis coming up. Anyway, this was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed sharing this with you. I hope you liked the reading. And I hope I will see you guys again tomorrow. And I'll pick up same time, I imagine, 4 o'clock. And we'll read again for about an hour or so until we are done. And after that, we'll probably go over the other version of the Golden Ass, the one by Lucian, right? Lucius, an ass. So lots of fun. I hope to see you guys again tomorrow with more The Golden Ass by Apuleius. And I hope I see you guys later on tonight for our live tarot session. All right. Thank you, everyone. Peace and love. Until tomorrow. Take care.